Good evening and welcome to the Get Football Mercato show, here every weekday to bring you the latest transfer news from across France, Germany and Italy. I'm your host Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Matthew Santangelo from Get Italian Football News, Andrew Thompson from Get German Football News and Grant Maitland from Get French Football News. We'll start tonight with a move edging closer, or ever closer at least, as Newcastle United look to finally start bringing in some players through the door. And one of those looks to be including Mainz forward Yoshinori Muto. Andrew, what can you tell us more about a potential deal for the Japanese international?
Well, simply that I don't think it makes much sense, at least from Newcastle's standpoint. I think it's important to note that the deal is going to go through because there's a credible amount of interest from Fulham for Aleksandr Mitrovic to bring him in full-time. He was only on loan for the second half of last season. He did quite well for Djurganovic there. They're interested in bringing him in. So Newcastle will need a replacement. Honestly, Mitrovic is their only true, in my opinion, at least center forward, and Muto does fit that mold to replace him. But they're very different players in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. Mitrovic is more of that traditional target man, that focal point in the attack. He's very good in the air. In regards to Muto, though, he's more of a mobile center forward. You know, he spent some time as on the left side of the attack as well for Mainz. So whether that indicates a shift in how Newcastle plan on moving forward in the attack this season is a different question. But the bigger issue for me and for Newcastle is that, his goal-scoring record is not really that fantastic for Mainz. I think he's scored maybe 23 and 70 odd appearances in all competitions for them since he moved there 3 years ago, which isn't that fantastic for someone you want to lead your line. And more importantly, his injury track record is also quite poor. In the 2015-16 season, I think he missed about 16 matches through injury, and in 16-17 he missed about 15 as well. He's had ligament issues multiple times over the course of his career, so that's something that Newcastle will have to watch out for as well. In terms of just bringing in a replacement player, they're going to get that through, but I'm not quite sure that it's the player that they should be bringing in. But as usual with Mike Ashley, it's more of how much money he's going to allow you to spend that'll restrict them. So we'll see how that pans out.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, really, because like you mentioned, his injury record isn't great. The 27 appearances he made last season was the most he's made in a Mainz shirt, which is a little bit surprising given his slightly poor goal return as well. But he was, to many English fans at least, linked with Chelsea before he turned up with the Bundesliga team. But when he is on the field more often, when it's not quite as often as he probably hoped, but can he be a player that impacts the Magpies positively, where goal scoring was an issue for them last season?
Again, I'm not quite sure. You know, to be fair, Mainz they're not blessed with creative players as well. So obviously the supply lines to them aren't going to be necessarily what they might be at Newcastle. You have the likes of John Joe Shelby pulling the strings from deep. That might serve him well in that regard, especially because, as I said before, his movement off the ball is solid for a center forward, and that'll allow maybe the likes of Dwight Gale to play off of that and create space for one another. But he can be wasteful in front of goal, and he can be inconsistent in front of goal, and the Premier League is all about taking your chances. So if he takes his chances well, if he settles at the club, he might be able to flirt with getting double digits, maybe 10 goals in the Premier League. But the two questions will be: can he settle? Japanese players don't have a good track record in the Premier League for starters, and if he can stay fit. So yeah.
That's always the difficult thing, but like you say, Toon are on a budget, so not a bad signing at least. Anyway, maybe get some depth. On to things in France, and a big move is pretty much almost confirmed. We had sources this evening that Monaco looked like they're all but sealed for dealing for Aleksandr Golovin from CSKA Moscow. The medical will plan to be tomorrow on a 5-year deal for 35 million euros, including bonuses. Grant, what do you think to that kind of deal?
Yeah, I think it's a suitable conclusion to one of the longer transfer sagas that we've had so far, dating all the way back to even before the World Cup. It's obviously much to the dismay of a lot of Chelsea fans across the world, as he chose AS Monaco over Chelsea after failing to agree to terms with the English club. I think you can attribute that choice to a number of things, specifically choosing Monaco. One of it could be the ruthlessness of the sporting director of AS Monaco, who of course is Michael Ameninalo. Ironically enough, of course, he used to be the sporting director of Chelsea, and now he's taking one of Chelsea's main targets away from them. I think for a lot of young players like Golovin, AS Monaco is kind of an easier sell because of their well-established track record when it comes to developing young talent. We've seen that, well-established diamonds that keep coming out of Monaco with Mbappe, Lamar, Fabinho, James Rodriguez. And I think with Golovin heading there, he's looking to kind of continue that track record. They have those incredible facilities, and obviously Leonardo Jardim is not afraid to give anyone a chance in the first 11.
And it's an interesting tug of war it was really between them and Chelsea, with obviously Roman Abramovich on one side, Dmitry Rybovlev and Vadim Vasiliev on the other side, really eventually convincing, what it seems like at least anyway, very much Golovin heading to France. But where do you see him fitting into this Monaco side? Obviously, João Moutinho went out the door last night heading to Wolves, opening a gap really in the midfield with potentially next to someone like Yuri Tielemans. Does he slot in straight away and become that creative force that Monaco maybe missed at times last season?
Yeah, I absolutely think he does, especially with the departures of Thomas Lemar and Fabinho as well. I think we saw him obviously impress in a more advanced role during the World Cup, especially during that 5-0 demolition of Saudi Arabia. If he can kind of replicate that same form that we saw in Russia, in France, then I think as a creative outlet for Monaco, he'd really excel. Obviously, they have a lot of talent surrounding him as well, and pairing him with Yuri Tielemans would definitely create one of the more creative and terrorizing midfields in Ligue 1. I have to imagine that he'll get plenty of playing time because, like you mentioned, João Moutinho's out, Thomas Lemar is out, and Fabinho's out. So I imagine for Leonardo Jardim, he'd slot right into the first 11.
It's going to be a really interesting signing, seeing if he can build on that exciting World Cup we all saw him have. On to matters in Italy, and an interesting development really this evening as Di Marzio has sort of come out with a report just before we've aired with this one, Matt, and it looks like there's more news on potentially Alvaro Morata filling that hole at the front of the AC Milan's forward attacking line, at least. What's the latest that we've heard from them?
Yeah, so with there's a lot of things going on with Milan. Obviously, there's the Bonucci talk possibly going back to Juve after 1 year. Then Milan are trying to work out some, the issues that are, or at least the blockade that's coming on with Caldara, of course, the young central defender from Atalanta that Juve just recently purchased. They want to fill that void with Bonucci, so they're trying to sort that out. But in the meantime, obviously, they have their well-documented striker problems up front. So that's where they're kind of looking at Morata. Of course, for a while, it seemed as though that Milan and Chelsea were a little bit of a duel here for Gonzalo Higuain from Juve, because Juve want to dump his wages. Of course, they just got Ronaldo, so he's really that excess for Juve at this point. But I think it's clear that Milan are now they're looking for a younger profile up front to complement Patrick Cutrone, who's 20 years old and though very talented, still has some room to grow. So that's where they want to get a big name talent like Morata. And right now, it seems is that they've, according to recent reports, is that Milan and their new sporting director, who was just appointed today, Leonardo, looks like they've made the initial contacts with Morata to see if there's anything there. The player seems keen. He was at Juve for several years. He did pretty well, and then he went back to Real Madrid, where they exercised their buyback on him before going to Chelsea. So I think it's clear that Morata does desire a return to Italy. His wife's Italian. They're having a baby soon. So I think there's a good fit for Milan there. Again, money talks, of course. Chelsea, I don't think are going to want to take a massive loss on this. I think they spent something around 65 to 70 million last year. So my guess is that Milan need to do some dumping of some other players in their squad, if you will, Nikola Kajinic, possibly Carlos Bacca, to see if they can make this deal happen up front, because I think it's clear that while Milan can probably spend a little bit of money here this summer, they still really don't want to kind of fall into that hole with financial fair play parameters and things like that to adhere to. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens the next couple of weeks. Again, of course, Milan's there right now in Los Angeles, and they're on the International Champions Cup tour. So there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes with Milan, and for better or for worse, it seems like Milan are always in the headlines with UEFA, with their ownership, with strikers, with Bonucci, possibly their captain leaving. So it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. But Morata seems like the target for them right now. So first contacts have been made. Let's see if Milan can make this happen.
And there's a lot of sort of moving pieces, like you mentioned there, really, at the moment. There's things going on everywhere because at the moment, like you've mentioned, that price will be the sticking point. Around 65, 70 million euros they've been quoted, which is around about what Chelsea paid. And they're obviously in a moment now where they're trying to save a little bit of money. Can they realistically, with those restrictions of financial fair play, get this deal done? I know that obviously they need to offload some players before that happens, but have they still got enough in the tank to get that big deal and still improve the squad?
I think they have, again, one or maybe room for one or two additions. Again, a lot's going to depend on what guys they can sell. Again, Kajanic, he's been linked with Atletico Madrid. Baca has made it publicly clear that he really does want to go back to Spain and stay with possibly Villarreal, who he had a pretty decent season with last year. So I think, again, if they can stir up some cash there. Plus, I think it looks like the hedge fund Elliott are willing to spend a little bit of money here for Leonardo to work with for the summer to get the guys he needs. Again, they spent so much last year, so they really shouldn't be in the position that they should have to spend as much. But here we are talking about them still trying to get a striker, still possibly looking at a winger. So there's a lot of things going on with Milan. I think if they can get a couple of sales here with some players, I think they can. They would invest the money to get the striker that they need. Again, it really is going to depend if they're willing to go as high as 65 to 70 million, which is what Chelsea. If they can knock that price down, maybe 50, 55 with bonuses, I think that would probably be a sweet spot for Milan to land him. But again, it's really going to depend on what the price is because Chelsea, they have their own striker problems right now, or at least their problem that they're trying to sort out. And it seems as though that they want to be able to get the money from the proceeds of Morata to fund their replacement. So it's going to be interesting to see what dominoes fall here and to see if that ultimately sees Morata return to Italy with Milan.
I'm thinking maybe Bonucci, Juve, Higuain, Chelsea, then sell Morata to AC. Maybe there's a little bit of a merry-go-round just setting itself up. But let's go and focus more narrowly on the leagues now, and starting with the Bundesliga and you, Andrew, and the interesting one that seems to be a bit of a strange story, really, and that's Max Meyer, who is obviously out of contract at Schalke now and has been linked with a number of clubs across Europe, including the likes of Arsenal. But it looks like at the moment that it will be Hoffenheim that might be his destination. That's the rumour that's hotting up.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting. Just for me, it's someone that I've seen come through at Schalke since he was younger, and you looked at him when he was a younger player, and you would think that he, unlike Lewis Holtby before him, would actually make good on his potential as he came through. But it's not gone right for him at Schalke, and after the falling out with the board and his contract situation there, and the claims of being bullied, he's wanted out. As you say, he has been linked with Arsenal, but Sport Bild reported that his main desire was to go to Atletico Madrid, but that fell through. So now it's Hoffenheim that have swooped in and have reported interest. For me, I think it's a sensible move. I don't think he was ready to go to a much bigger club. And I know he had a sort of a resurgence this season this year as playing in a deeper role, despite coming through as an attacking player when he came through at the youth ranks. But he performed well enough, but I think his performances were a bit overstated. So I think making the jump to Hoffenheim will not really a jump. It's more of a lateral move, considering both will be in Europe next season. Hoffenheim needed central players. Dennis Geiger and Lucas Rupp are both injured. Rupp's going to be out till December. And at the moment, that only leaves Florian Grilic and realistically, Karim Demirbay is only central players they have fit going into the new league season, one that will include Champions League. So despite his age, Meyer's experienced. He does offer that creativity from deeper that Nagelsmann will enjoy in his deployments, despite only having 1 year left at the club. He will be going to RB Leipzig after this season. So for me, it's a sensible move for him. I do think that Atletico or someone like Arsenal would have been a step too far for him. I think if he can get a couple seasons and since I'm under his belt, prove that it wasn't more of just a one-season wonder kind of thing, I think then he'll be fit to make a bigger move. But for me, I think this is sensible on both parties right now for sure.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because a lot of these Schalke players, we get it all the time, really. It seems like any attacking midfielder that plays for them gets high promise, but another one that hasn't quite lived up to the expectations. But maybe there's a chance to resurrect himself at Hoffenheim in that deeper role where he did do reasonably well last season. And Hoffenheim are in the news as well because they've also signed a player today, and that's Adams Nuhu from BCS Young Boys in Switzerland. Obviously, the league champions there this season as well, on an €8 million deal, which is for a 5-year contract as well. They need a little bit more reinforcement in the defence. They obviously tend to play that 3-man back line. Is this the kind of right move for Hoffenheim to be making under that last year under Nagelsmann?
I think it is. I mean, the funny thing is, though, I don't necessarily know if they need the reinforcement. There are links and rumors that would see that Erwin Bišćak is just going to be leaving the club. Obviously, he fell out of favor. He's maybe 5th or 6th choice down the pecking order. But despite that, with Nuhu coming in, at the moment, they have 8 center backs at the club. And even when you play 3 at the back, 8 center backs is a lot for your first team. So there might be 1 or 2 more going out. But then again, Hoffenheim do have younger players. Justin Hoekma is only 20 years old. Stefan Posch is only 21. Kevin Okpaguma, who had a breakout season last year, is still only 23. So it does give them rotation options, which is good. But I think the more worrying thing is the fact that Benjamin Ubner is getting up there in age. He's almost 30, and he's been one of their standout center back performers of the last couple of years. So it'll be good under Nagelsmann's system, but more importantly, again, it's the club thinking about what's going to happen after Nagelsmann leaves for RB Leipzig. And I think that's the biggest issue that they'll want to tackle, and have some younger players, getting that seasoning this year ready for the managerial change next year. I think that's what they're aiming to target, and this is certainly one of those moves. And if it's anything like the Manuel Akanji move from the Swiss league to the Bundesliga, then Hoffenheim may have another younger center back gem on their hands as well, and they're quite good with identifying younger players. So it'll be interesting to see how this one develops. I think it's a good move for them, though.
It's always good to keep building, even if the talented young manager is off to pastures new. On to someone who may be moving to the Bundesliga, or is at least an interesting Werder Bremen, and that is Thiago Mendes of Lille. Obviously, the club relatively struggled last season, but he was maybe one of the better players. But a reported €20 million price tag is maybe just about putting them off going for a real strong move on this one.
I think so. They're never going to have a ton of money to spend. For them, it's just all been about survival the last couple of years. Losing Thomas Delaney to Dortmund will be the player they're trying to replace. They've also been linked with other players as well. I think David Klaassen was another one who's been touted for a move there. But for me, I think the question will be, can they replace Delaney's combativeness? He was excellent in midfield on the defensive side of the ball, pressed very well, was good in the air. He did have a bit of creativity about him. Maybe could offer a couple of goals here and there as well. So I don't know enough about Mendes to speak to if he's that type of player, or if this will maybe see them going another avenue after losing Delaney. But again, I think I don't necessarily see them wanting to spend the money. That doesn't mean that it won't, but it might not afford them the ability to reinforce other areas of the squad. So I think that'll be the question moving forward. So if they don't pull the trigger on this one, that's going to be the reason why, and they're going to want to go for someone a bit cheaper, maybe 5-6 million cheaper, so that they could put those funding towards another position that they might want to reinforce.
And that's the interesting conundrum, and I'll bring you in on this one, Grant, really, because Thiago Mendes had an okay season, but that's probably being a little bit kind on what was a dreadful season, really, for Lille. He was a player that maybe did a little bit more than others, but at the same time, €20 million, it's surely a big risk on a player that didn't quite have the greatest of seasons in his first season, in French football at least.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right with that, Nathan. €20 million sounds a little steep when we're seeing some of the other prices that clubs are playing for, perhaps more talented center backs. However, like you were just hinting at, I think you do have to give him a little bit of extra credit in his performances and the fact that he's being linked away from Lille, given the fact that Lille was such a chaotic atmosphere this past season, and it really took a lot to stand out in the rough there. So obviously 20 million, maybe a little bit too much, but you do have to give him a little bit of extra credit.
And let's move on to things in France now, and sticking with Lille, really, because a perfect segue, really. A player that may be also looking for the way out is Kelvin Malqui, who obviously joined from Saint-Etienne the season before, thinking it may have been a bit more positive than it ended up being. But there's a number of clubs linked with him, both a couple of British clubs, Fulham and Crystal Palace, supposedly rumoured, and Napoli have even inquired about him previously as well. So, do you think that maybe it's best for Lille at least to maybe cash in on someone that is a pretty sellable asset when they need to try and find a little bit more money for the DNCG?
Yeah, I think they probably should. It seems like it's almost out of necessity now, but if anything, now would be the time, given a signing that they actually made earlier this summer transfer window. They signed Zeki Çelik, who's a Turkish international. They signed him for €2.5 million on a 5-year deal, and he showed a lot of promise during his career with a club in Turkey. I think if they give him the chance, he should step up if Kevin Malcuit is to depart, especially if they can kind of conjure up a bidding war between all the clubs that are linked. Like you mentioned, Fulham is in there, and West Ham are the two most recent clubs to have inquired about the French right back. But Valencia, Napoli, Inter, and Celta Vigo are also interested. For the time being, you could likely rule out Inter and Celta as the two want a loan with option to buy, whereas Lille, if their asset is to depart, they would like to sell him outright as opposed to a loan to option. So, like you were saying, now is probably the right time for him to leave. He did provide 6 assists for his team last season, and again was one of the few bright spots in such a tumultuous season for one of Ligue 1's more historic clubs. So if they were to sell, now would be the time, because they kind of have a replacement who should be able to step up, and they wouldn't have invested in him if they weren't considering the sale of Malcuit.
An interesting one at that. And what one confirmed just before we went on air, that Rennes' own feed gave this one away, and they've confirmed that Yoris Gnagnon will be joining Sevilla, and it looks like he'll be heading that way to Spain tomorrow. And they obviously managed to get Clement Grenier through the door before that. But let's focus on the defender first, Grant. It's a decent deal, but believed to be around €15 million. I know our very own Rich Allen is a little bit disappointed it's not a little bit more, but you can always ask for a little bit more. But yet another academy graduate from Rennes going for pastures new and has a bright future.
Yeah, he absolutely does. I mean, age just 21 years old. You can imagine that in a few years, given his strength, intelligence, and speed, he'll be the modern-day definition of a rock at the back. I think if I was to go out on a limb, across Europe, this might even be one of the best moves throughout this summer. I have a lot of confidence in Gnagnon going forward, and I think if you compare it to one of the other centre-back departures from France, in Mouktar Diakabe, who left Lyon for Valencia for €15 million as well, you really have to kind of question the amount that Rennes got for Gnagnon, given the fact that he's a more established first-team player for Rennes, and he's impressed for longer, yet they got the same exact amount as Lyon did get for Diakabe. For Sevilla, as I mentioned, this is probably a great move for them. They're obviously replacing the departing fellow Frenchman Clement Lenglet after his high-profile €35 million move to Barcelona. It's a great investment when you compare the prices. As I mentioned, Gnagnon is strong, intelligent, quick, and only 21 years old, so plenty of room to grow. And they're getting him for €20 million less than they just received for Lenglet. I would say he might be a slight step down in ability right now, but give him a year or two, and he could quickly establish himself as one of the best center backs in La Liga.
Yeah, it feels like another one of those classic Sevilla moves of getting someone through the door that's great. And I also want to go back to Rennes really very quickly on the signing they've made, and that's Clement Grenier coming through the door. He's had several injury hit years, and I'm sure Matt will remember his very brief spell, at least at Roma, that didn't really turn out very well either. But a 6 months renovation project really at Guingamp has revitalised him, and a chance for him now, similar to others, to take that slight step up again and show what he's worth.
Yeah, he really did impress during his short stint in Guingamp, Rennes' regional rival. I think the investment that they made, right around €4 million for Grenier, is relatively risk-free given the fact that he was such an influential midfielder for Guingamp at the tail end of last season. They're obviously adding him to a midfield that's full of some other talents like Benjamin Andre and Beauregard. And he's a welcome addition to a summer that is, outside of the departure of Gnagnon, actually been a pretty promising summer for Stade Rennais FC. They obviously signed the striker Jordan Sibachu, who in theory will solve their striker woes. So I think with the addition of Grenier behind him as more of a creative presence, paired with some industrious midfielders that Rennes already have, they should have a pretty impressive attack in the next season.
And on to the final bit of news from Ligue 1 this evening, and that's Jeffrey Adelaide looking like he's going to be making his move to Angers permanent after being on loan for 6 months at the end of last season. Did reasonably well. Didn't quite break through as much as promised, but obviously Angers saw enough in him, Grant, to go for this and go for a permanent deal that should be a positive move for the youngster as well.
Yeah, it should be nice for him to get a little bit more first team play time for Angers. You kind of have to call into question Arsenal, I believe, in this deal. Obviously, a lot of it is rooted from when he was just recently axed from Arsenal's preseason tour squad. That threw up a lot of questions of his future at the club, if he was to leave on loan or leave permanently. I think selling him permanently might be a little bit of a mistake, especially when you compare it to some other questionable decisions that Arsenal have made recently. I think if you look at it in the future, we can kind of maybe see this deal unfold just like the Serge Gnabry deal did for Arsenal, where they sold one of their younger, more promising wingers. And just a year or two later, they're absolutely regretting the deal, having seen how direct and skillful Gnabry is in the Bundesliga. Of course, René Adelaide is still just 20 years old. He's a very promising player. He's got a great dribbling ability. He's very agile. And in the small sample size, as you mentioned, that we saw him in Ligue 1 in the tail end of last season, he did complete over 2 dribbles per game. So his ability to beat his man and kind of progress into the attacking third should definitely give a little spark to Angers, who have seen one of their more influential attackers in Karl Toko Ekambi leave for Villarreal. So it was obvious that they would need something to bring in to kind of not necessarily replace Toko Ekambi, because obviously he's more of a front man, whereas René Adelaide will see feature more in a winger position. But the addition of René Adelaide, a promising French player, to Angers would definitely be encouraging if I were a fan of Angers myself.
An interesting move indeed. Let's hope that he continue his ascension. And on to matters in Serie A now, and there's plenty going on as always. It seems to be in Italy, Matt, and we'll start with something you briefly touched upon earlier when we were talking about Milan, and that's Leonardo, who's joined the club as sporting director. Obviously, they got rid of the original sporting director earlier this week, and he steps through the door. What kind of plan do you think the Brazilian will bring to Milan?
Well, I think with, first off, with Massimiliano Miliberli, he was the previous sporting director during the Chinese takeover last year, along with Marco Fassone as the CEO. It's clear, though, with Elliott taking control of the club now, they really want to just clean house. They want a clean slate. They want to give that, I guess, that picture, that perception to the fans that they're bringing in the best they can bring in, the guys who know what it takes to get Milan back to where it needs to be. And so when you get a guy like Leonardo, I think that's a great appointment, although initially some ultras, they put out a banner once they got word about this possible return for Leonardo. They weren't really up. They really weren't too thrilled with it for whatever reason. Again, maybe they feel like he was a traitor. He went to Inter. He played a role with them. But in any case, I think it's one thing's clear is that Leonardo, he knows Milan. He was a player. He was a coach after Carlo Ancelotti left, who he admired. Went, of course, to he was actually at PSG as well. Now he's coming back to Milan. So I think it's a great appointment. I think we're kind of seeing it already that he's really going after some top guys. These are the guys he wants to bring in. He's well respected. He knows the game. He knows he has a grasp on the market. So from just looking at it on the surface already in just short time, Leonardo is really going to be working here to get Milan back to where they need to be. And he's going to make the additions that they really do need. He's not going to bring in certain players just to kind of fill out the roster. He kind of is observing it right now and thinking there's got to be a striker, there's got to be this, there's got to be that, and he's kind of putting all the pieces together. So for Leonardo, I think he's got his work cut out with him. He's got to stay within the financial fair play framework. That's kind of obvious. But at the same time, I think if he was able to get a striker, he's able to get maybe a defender, again, if they work out everything with Bonucci Caldara or whatever the case is, and then maybe even a winger if there's something else left in the budget, I think most Milan fans would be accepting of that, given the fact that he's kind of stepping in midsummer, if you will. It's kind of a difficult transition from, the Chinese to Elliott now. So if he's able to kind of tick off a couple extra boxes that they need in certain positions, Milan fans got to be quite pleased, given the fact that he really hasn't had much time, or the whole summer rather, to really assess the market, to really act on the market, and to really properly go after the guys he wants with that excess of time.
And it's going to be interesting to see what he can do. A little bit more time in his hands maybe in January. But on to a team still seething really somewhat from the Malcolm saga in Roma. Their goal really, Matt, is still another wide man in this window, but who are they targeting now?
So it looks like after everything kind of fell through with Malcolm, shockingly, which is a pretty crazy thing. I'm still getting over it myself, but it looks like though that Monkey's trying to he's kind of casting a wide net. I think he's going to get creative in this position. I feel that there's going to be a possible attempt at Suso. There's been reports that he likes Suso quite a bit. I think, of course, Suso's release clause of 38 million euro has expired, so they would have to sort that out. Again, I think that's going to be a difficult operation for them to pull off. But in any case, I think that he's a possibility for them if the price is right, of course. But I think one of the biggest fits, in my opinion, for Roma's winger need is Domenico Berardi. He's kind of this player from Sassuolo, of course, for those who don't know. He's been this guy that's been linked with big moves in the past, but for whatever reason has decided not to move. He was targeted by Juventus a couple of years ago. He really wanted more guarantees in terms of minutes and a role, and so he kind of stayed at Sassuolo. But in any case, he's kind of dipped off recently with regards to his temperament, some injuries, and just things like that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Di Francesco give his thumbs up on a Domenico Berardi reuniting with him and from the time at Sassuolo, especially if the price works out where it's they're able to get the guy that has a good fit with the manager. He kind of understands him, and he also becomes a fit, obviously tactically. That's a big thing there, but. The good news is for Roma, they have some time. Monchi is going to continue to act. He's going to continue to see where the value is. That's kind of what he does. And I think Berardi would be probably the biggest target for me because, yes, his value has taken a hit recently, but I think there's so much potential there that at 23, 24, that it's too good to pass up if he can get him at a good price right now. And obviously we know how Roma operate, where if they can get a guy for 25, 30, there's a good chance they'll be able to flip him for more than that. So again, we saw that with Alisson, which is the perfect example. So it's going to be interesting. But again, Roma are not done. They've had they've been one of the busier teams in Italy this entire summer. I believe they've added 11 to 12 new players, give or take. So expect more developments on the winger front for Roma. Again, I think Domenico Berardi is probably the ideal candidate, or the most likely for fit and everything like that at this time. But again, names could come up, and we can expect a possibility of another Monkey Madness at some point.
And that's no doubt, really. It would be interesting to see if Domenico Berardi finally gets that big move, really, and see what can happen for him. But one player I wanted to bring in, I wanted to discuss this with you as well, Andrew, obviously, because he's obviously currently plying his trade in the Bundesliga. Another man that Roma have briefly mentioned is Leon Bailey. He's also supposedly looking at a London move with Chelsea and Arsenal in the wings as well. What do you think to his chances of moving on, really, Andrew? I know Bayer and their sporting director have been out and saying that there's not a move in the pipeline, but he's attracting a lot of interest.
Well, rightfully so, honestly. For me, he's one of the best young talents in Europe, personally, even since when he came through in Belgium. Bayer are, I would say, notorious, but they play their cards close to their chest. So while there's been a statement that's come out that said that he's not that he's not for sale, but there hasn't really been any formal approaches for him, that doesn't necessarily mean that there hasn't been. And Bayer do have a history of selling on their best young players, for massive profits, but that's just because realistically right now they're not a destination where they can really keep hold of players. For me, I think Bailey will stay this summer. I would be shocked if he doesn't move next summer. I don't think they've really gotten enough out of him yet in terms of a return in a footballing sense. They do have a lot of good young players still there. You still have Julian Brandt, who's still there. He signed a long-term deal, which kind of surprised quite a few people considering the interest that was touted with him from both Borussia Dortmund and Bayern Munich. They also have Kai Havertz coming through, and he's broken through in the last year or so. So it's going to be interesting to see how he develops. And I think that might be why they want to hang on to Bailey, at least for another season. But again, I would be surprised if he's there come the season after what's coming up for sure. But in regards to going, if it's Roma that he's, that are tied in interest, it's one of a few destinations that would really suit him. I think they play his type of football. I think he matches, I guess, what they want in a winger. You could probably see a little bit of similarities between him and Malcolm. So I guess it would make sense from a playing standpoint, sure.
And it'd be interesting to see if someone does try and pinch him away with, especially the English window fastly shutting. Let's finish in Serie A again with yourself, Matt, and one deal that has gone through, and someone who has played in Italy previously, and that's Christian Pulisic, is headed to Atalanta. An interesting move for them. They obviously have been more of a selling club in the last sort of year or so, unfortunately, because of that great success they've had. Another good season last season as well. But would he add something to their midfield?
I think he will. I think Mario Pasalic, he was one of those players who, one of those Chelsea players who kind of just went out on loan and to kind of see where he can find stability in his career, if you will. Of course, he was at Monaco, where he spent the season at Milan, where he played pretty well under Montella, mostly in the second half of the season. He was given opportunity to kind of play a role in Milan's chase for Europa League. And obviously, he scored some pretty big goals. He played some pretty good football as well. He was able to adapt rather quickly to the Italian game, which doesn't usually happen often for younger players, younger foreign players. But I think getting back to Atalanta, you mentioned their structure, their model, if you will, recently as being a selling club, and I think this is kind of that same possibility with Pasalic, where it's a good value buy. And it's a lot of times I think it's comparable. You can compare it to what they do with Brian Cristante, who was at Milan. He went to Benfica. He was around a couple of teams in Italy. They took a €6 million investment on him. He had a great season. I think he scored 9 or 10 goals from the midfield this past season for Atalanta. And then they sold him to Roma for 30 million. So I think this is kind of that cut from that same cloth of business for Atalanta, if you will. And that I think it's kind of obvious that they're always going to be one of those teams that in Italy that people look to for talent. Franceschi, you had Caldara, you had Conti, you had obviously Gagliardini moved to Inter a couple 2 winters ago. So there's always clubs looking for Atalanta because they do such a great job developing players and moving players through the system. They have a great academy, one of the best in Europe, in my opinion. A fantastic coach in Gasparini. So it's kind of quite clear that yes, they're going to still be considered a kind of maybe for lack of a better term, a feeder club, but at the same time they do a great job. They're a great opportunity for younger players like Pasalic to find stability, find minutes, find growth, and then parlay that into a bigger move. Maybe I'm going too far in saying this, but maybe they're kind of like the Italian version of Monaco in that they give opportunity, they give minutes, they give a good environment overall to grow into a great professional or a good professional footballer. So I think when you're looking at this move, again, it's a great value, probably a couple million euros, nothing drastic where it's going to kind of empty their pockets. And again, it's just another piece of the puzzle that's going to help Gasparini continue to compete, continue to move this model and this project forward to where it needs to be, just to kind of compete in that Europa League phase and possibly again if the stars align, top 4. We weren't too long ago where we saw Atalanta, I believe a couple of years ago, they finished 4th ahead of Lazio on the final match day. Again, things have changed with the structure of Serie A. A lot of teams are getting better, but you get my point is that Atalanta are a team that they know how to operate, they know how to do things on the market, and they know how to build a team that's able to compete. And I think that when you look at Pasalic, that's just one of the cases with him where it's a good move to kind of continue the project, continue that model of what they like to do, and have it keep moving forward.
Absolutely, and it'll be interesting to see how he sort of develops under Gasparini, who has done a magnificent job there in the last few seasons. Just before we finish tonight, we'd like to thank everyone concerning our French side of things on Twitter. On Get French Football News, we hit the 100,000 mark on Twitter on followers earlier this evening, which is great news from all of us at 5 years that we've been doing this, and it's great to see the growth still going. Thank you all for joining us on that side, and do give Get German Football News and Get Italian Football News a follow as well if you don't already. But that's all from us this evening. My thanks to Matthew, Andrew and Grant for their company, and of course to all of you at home. Please join us again tomorrow for more from the crazy world of the transfer window. Good night.